Okay, so we've been discussing this topic for quite a while, which got me a little apprehensive should we continue, but I looked at the document that we're basing our discussion upon, and I saw there's still a way to go, and it's okay. We're going, what we have ahead of us is today we're going to discuss a few attitudes of certain rabbis towards mostly Reform, but in general non-Orthodox movements. Then later on, this is more right now at this stage, more kind of call it political or general statements, attitudes, and we're going to discuss them. And then later on, also halachic responsa of Moshe Feinstein in the United States about relationships with Reform shuls and so on. So these are some points we're going to discuss, at least in the next 2 or 3 meetings. And but I am looking forward to what will come after that. I had some idea today, but it's a little early right now, so we're not going to get into that right now. What we ended with in our previous meeting, hopefully we're being steady now every 2 weeks. So what we discussed 2 weeks ago, we ended with was the low numbers of people in the non-Orthodox movements, in the conservative movement as well, who actually follow the halachic or the frameworks of the movement. It's more like there's a small, thin layer. Of course, it varies from community to community and time to time, but there's a relatively thin layer of, here's Mark, of people who do, and that has and that does tell us something about the significance of how important the movement can really be. I don't mind if you lean on my.
I don't disturb you. Family.
Okay, and we discussed how even just taking into consideration how what kind of influence does the question. It's not only a question of truth, it's also a question of pragmatism. Does the framework that you create, does it work? Does it give Jewish sustenance, a spiritual, practical sustenance to a family? Does it pass on from parents to children to grandchildren? And if it does, it's one thing that you believe this is the right thing, but if it doesn't work and it's not going to continue on, then it's not going to work. So it's you have to be more, I would say, if it doesn't work, you have to be more careful, or maybe more conservative, non-capital C, in the way you relate to things. I think that's relevant to us as well. Being so-called, I don't like being called liberal, but so-called liberal Orthodox, or open-minded, or open Orthodoxy, or centrist, or all kinds of words. But being in this position, also we have to be, and in general, a posek, a rabbi, you have to see if what you believe in is right, is giving people a framework that's good for them spiritually. And sometimes you might believe in a certain truth that's very, very broad and very spiritual and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very abstract. That's it, very abstract. I mean, you might focus on saying that, Judaism is not only about practical halachot, of course, it's also about that. But there's something important in the spirituality and the more abstract aspect of it, which can be beautiful. But if you're going to lose the people because of that, then you're losing and not gaining. So that does have to be taken into consideration. And certainly when you're looking at a large scale movement, does it work? And at least the last decades are telling us that something there is not working, and or is working on small numbers, and that in itself is something to be taken into consideration. As I said, also for us, we have to check, does it work for us? On the other hand, sometimes people make progress in big numbers in certain religious movements, but you just can't accept some of the moral prices or the prices of lack of authenticity. People have to believe in things that they don't authentically believe in order to maintain such a framework which is very rigid and so on. So there's a limit to that as well, but these are considerations that should be taken into things that should be taken into consideration, and certainly for me, they are taken into consideration. It's not only a question of what's right, it's also about a question about what functions well and helps the Jewish community thrive and grow both spiritually but also practically. So these are, and also I would say to remain within a certain framework of something we want to be part of, meaning I could accept certain things that I wouldn't say are forbidden, but are so, you rock the boat up to a point. You make a change up to a point, and there's a point where you say, I'm not going to go any farther than that right now, because it will not be accepted in the broader community. And as we've said very clearly several times, Osha and myself, about Kino David, we ask ourselves not only what's right to do, but also what can raise a certain discussion within the community, the larger, broader community. Some things make a stir and create a discussion, and that's positive in our eyes. But some things just make a fight, and it's not about right or wrong. It's about, is it going to be able to create some kind of positive process, or is it just going to create animosity and objection and so on? So this should also be taken into consideration. And I have to say one last thing before we move on, and that is to express appreciation of men and women in the Orthodox community who understand this, who do think that there are certain things that should be accepted, that can be accepted, and so on, but understand that there's a need for a pace of a process, and are willing to hold back and accept that you have to develop with this necessary pace in order for it to be a positive process in the long run. And I think that's worth noting. Appreciation of people who live within the Orthodox community, although they believe certain things can be done, but they accept that it's not the time for it or not the stage for it in the larger process. I think it's worth noting appreciation of this attitude on these people. Okay, so I'd like to move on to, as I said, a couple of statements that certain rabbis, people, Orthodox people who oppose reform and conservative movements, things that they say. For instance, here I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll say it in English. הרפורמים יותר גרועים מהחילונים. Okay, the reform are worse than the non-religious. What do they mean by this? Don't misunderstand me. I am not standing behind this statement. I'm not supporting this statement. I'm quoting a statement someone else says. I will try to explain why he thinks that way, and then to relate to it myself, and of course open it up for other people to relate to. Some people say, and I hear this quite often, one of the times I heard it was when I came to help Kilat Amitai build the sukkah, and someone with a kippah saw me and said, "What are you doing? Why are you helping them? They pray mixed and they drive on Shabbat." And I said that may be true, although I don't know about every specific individual, whether or not he drives on Shabbat. If I'm not mistaken, Rav Gustavo does not drive on Shabbat. I don't think he does. I'm not sure about every specific member of the community. But in any case, I said, so what? They want to fulfill the mitzvah. They want to give the mitzvah of sukkah. So if they drive on Shabbat, I shouldn't help them build the sukkah. What does that have to do with anything? But in any case, why do they say this? Because they think that people who are not religious, chilonim, who don't keep mitzvot, it's not important for them, Jewish community, Jewish spirituality, Jewish law, tradition, these are not things are not important for them. So they don't pose a danger to Torah, to halakha, to orthodoxy. Whereas a movement that has an ideology and it's different than my ideology, and they claim this is the true Judaism, that's a danger. They're causing more danger. They're causing more damage. They pull people into their attitude. Someone who's not religious doesn't care what happens at the Kotel, so we can continue our way at the Kotel. And people who have a different way, they want the Kotel of their own. They want to change our Kotel. They want to change things the way things are run in our religion. And that's more dangerous than someone who's not religious. That's a greater threat than someone who's not religious. I'm trying to remember, it was very recently that I heard that attitude once again. I remember when. It was at a bar mitzvah not so long ago. A relative of the family of the bar mitzvah was talking to me about a friend of his who was, they're a group of friends, they grew up together in non-religious families. And this person who was talking to me became religious, Orthodox, strictly Orthodox, and very, in a positive, I'm saying this in a positive way, very committed to halakha, to mitzvot. And one of the friends who also became religious, one of the friends who's not religious had whether it was a bar mitzvah, I think for one of his children. And another one of the friends who did become religious happens to be, he will be in the United States when this other family is having their bar mitzvah, and he's been invited. And now how can he get out of it? Meaning, if he's here in Israel and they have a bar mitzvah in America, in a non-Orthodox shul, mixed seating, Shabbat, everything, he can say, Mazal Tov, I'm sorry, I'm in Israel. But he happens to be in the States at the time. So he's invited to the bar mitzvah. Now how do I get out of it? So this family member, the relative of the bar mitzvah, was asking me, what's your attitude? And I said to him, my attitude is, my approach is that you don't daven there, because I don't accept that that's okay to daven that way. But I daven in an Orthodox shul, and then I go to the bar mitzvah without davening with them. I told him a story about Bet Sefer Tali here in Ra'anana that had a teacher. I don't remember his name. Maybe someone here remembers the name, maybe Eliezer. There was a teacher who was a very beloved, it's an elementary school, and he was a very beloved teacher by the children. And he was in a terrible car accident. He was severely wounded. And on a Friday morning, they got together, the children and graduates of the school got together to have a tfilat shacharit and pray for this teacher. And because I'm connected to them, actually, I'll be there again this coming Friday to give, a rabbinic content to one of their parties. I think this Friday is I don't remember if it's the second or third graders getting a chumash or getting a siddur, whatever it is. So they asked me if I would join the davening. So I asked them, what will the davening be? They told me it would be conservative. I told them, I won't join you. I'll have Gustavo led the service. I won't join you. I will daven separately, but I will come and tell me what time the davening is. I will come at some point, and I will be happy to take some part, not in the tefillah, as my obligation of tefillah, but something or other. And that's what we did. I was not there during the tefillah. I came at a certain point, like in the second half, and stood in the back. And when the davening ended, they asked me publicly, they were parents and graduates and teachers and students, and they asked me to say a Perek Teilim. I don't have any problem saying a Perek Teilim. It's not a davening setup, separate, mixed. They put the Perek Teilim on the screen. They projected it on a screen, and I said the Perek Teilim. I don't remember. Maybe they repeated it after me. Sadly, the teacher died a few days later, but I did participate in that way, and that's what I told him. He was actually he wasn't shocked. The person who asked me was not shocked, but was a little surprised, and we discussed it. It was okay. It was fine. But again, this is where I heard. He said to me, "You don't think that you're giving them legitimacy by going to their party at their shul and so on?" And my claim was that they're not waiting for my legitimacy, yes or no. Keeping positive relationships with them, and no, I don't accept that they are more dangerous, because first of all, this is a very, what's the word in English? Hachlala. This is you're saying something general, but it demands, you really need to get into the details. Do they, or put it this way, there are some non-religious people who, when they want religion, they want orthodoxy. That is definitely true. There are people, non-religious people in Israel, who will not go to a Reform shul. And when they want a bar mitzvah for their son, they'll come to Orthodox. They think Reform is very bad. It's not what they know. They haven't studied it. It's not that they've made a real deep decision. Well, maybe some people did, but they're opposed to it. So these are the non-religious people that you're looking to. They don't have a clear position on Judaism. And that's not that's taking one kind of person. There are a lot of different people in today's world. There are non-religious people who are anti-religious, who are opposed to religion, or who are opposed to religion, I would say, because of some religious leaders and the way that they do things and what they represent and so on. And sometimes that's causing much more damage to Judaism than people who have a different attitude. And these, for example, on that day at Tali, I was impressed with the graduates who are either high school kids or post-high school, that they participated in the tefillah, and their understanding of davening was not what I hope for my children and grandchildren. It's not what I hope, but it was a lot more than most Israelis growing up in non-religious schools know about tefillah. They knew Shema Yisrael, they knew Tefillat Amidah. Maybe they say it different than me. Certainly the way they daven and mixed without a mechitza and so on, and other differences in the tefillah is different than me. But I didn't see that as more dangerous to Judaism. I thought it kept these kids with a connection. And even if I go beyond that, when I go to Tali, I give these families and these children an opportunity to meet an Orthodox rabbi who might be relevant for their lives, rather than say to them, I'm against you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Don't come to me. I created some kind of discussion, some kind of communication with them. So I don't think that this attitude that they are more dangerous is right. Yes, there are dangers. There are things that I would be wary of. There are things that I should think that they might cause damage, but that's such a generalization. It can go in so many different directions. We need to talk with one another. We need to argue with one another. We need to make decisions, what we'll do together, what we'll do separately. But to make a generalization that is so absolute and say they are more dangerous than the non-religious is not based on fact, I believe, not based on really thinking through. And it seems to me, it's more of a defense mechanism than anything else. It's more of a saying that I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to get to know them too well because, God forbid, maybe I'll discover something that I have to think about and deal with and is threatening to me. So I think it's more of a, maybe now I'm making a generalization about these religious people who say this. Maybe I shouldn't say that either. But really, if I discuss it with them, I can tell them why I don't think that's true, and go ahead, try to convince me. I don't see that. Now let's open this up for discussion. If anyone wants to add anything or say something, Eliezer, bevakasha.
Two things. First of all, I completely agree with you that it's worse to not have Judaism at all than to have some weaker version of it. That you can see this in the United States, that when there's a big movement to divest from supplying weapons to Israel, which is led by many Jews, and because they don't have any connection to Judaism, and or at least to Halakha Judaism, and I think also if you look at that synagogue, if you cut off during the course of history everybody who is not Orthodox Jew, I think a synagogue would have a membership of maybe 2 people. Really. And because it's cyclical. Some people are Orthodox and their children become less Orthodox, and then their grandchildren become more Orthodox, and especially with Chabad. It continues the cycle. And Mark knows very well that if you have a bicycle and you cut off one of the spokes in the gears, bicycle won't get very far.
Okay.
If I may, first of all, with regard to the Tali school, I can say from firsthand experience that when Rabbi Zvi comes to the Tali school, sometimes I'm there because I have a couple of grandchildren there. It's just a delight, and it lends a spirit that absolutely would not be there if Rabbi Zvi was not there. So, coming to Tali.
Are you there this Friday?
I hadn't heard about that, so I want to know what's going on. I've got one in grade 2 and one in grade 5. With respect to that, with respect to the other aspects, look, I'm a non-Orthodox Jew, okay, but I'm Jewish. Too bad. It's going to stay that way. The point is that if somebody wants to say, look, I don't accept your Judaism, you're a danger to Judaism. What? I don't accept that.
By the way, I will add, just like I said about when you say reform are more dangerous than non-religious, you also have a picture of the non-religious person who's very accepting of Orthodoxy, he doesn't keep it, and he's not struggling and things like that, which is not always true. You also have a specific picture of the reform person who's all up in arms. And not just, now I know today, for several decades I didn't know, but today I know all kinds of different rabbis of different denominations, male and female. And I'm not saying all of them, some of them, those who I know, we can get along just fine, and they're not out to turn Orthodox people into reform. That's not what they're busy with. I can have discussions with some of them about something which we can have common ground on how important it is for them to keep Jewish values in their communities and so on. And although it's very different than what I do, but still there's some common ground there. And yes, there are some who are what would the word be? Who are they're out there to fight against something. Some of them can be very harsh at times, going overboard, but well, maybe I don't know those people are really militant. That's the word I was looking for. Some may be militant, maybe that's why I don't know them, but or I don't have a relationship with them. But again, it's such a generalization. It has to be dealt with in detail with a certain person or a certain community. And I'd like to add something else. Of course, there's a difference in religious beliefs as well, as far as believing in Torah being of heavenly source and things like that. But at the same time, when a person that Judaism is important for them, reform or conservative, but also reform, I'm saying, it means that they see some values there, meaning they don't think there are people who keep certain low levels of Jewish days or chagim or certain customs just because this is what they grew up with. This is our folklore, like every nation has their folklore. Usually, or almost always, these people are not people who this is their drive. A person who is leading, who is a religious reform or conservative leader, it's because there's something here that's important for them. They see value in this. And so when they keep certain parts of Judaism, even though I disagree with them on parts that they don't keep or on how they keep certain details, but they're keeping certain values or parts of Torah because it's important for them and they want to pass it on to their children, to their congregants, and so on. So I see value here, positive value. It's not only that we don't disagree about everything, even where we disagree, they care about some of the values that I care about, and therefore there's some Jewish content going on there that I don't think we should overlook. By the way, it's a famous, I don't want to make another generalization and say all the Haredim say, but some Haredim could say about religious Zionist Jews, oh, they're worse than the Chilunim. Again, because we pose a threat, and sometimes, in some ways, I think it's different. Part of the reason we pose a threat is because we have, and again, I don't want to be haughty, but there's a positive aspect. We have proven that you can be a modern scientist, a professional in all kinds of different professions, and keep halakha seriously, and keep Shabbat, and go to the army, and so on. One of the things going on now with the whole argument about Haredim going to the army or not, is a woman who grew up Haredi. I don't know her personally, but if I have the story of her life, if I understood it correctly, she has already moved away from the Haredi community earlier, but she did not grow up in places where men went to the army. I'm not even going to mention women in that context. But when one of the, just recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, less than a month ago, Rabbi Avi Goldberg from Yerushalayim was killed in battle in Lebanon. He was a Rav Tzva'i. He was a military rabbi with the soldiers in Lebanon, very beloved by all the soldiers there. He was a Rav of one of the schools in Jerusalem, one of the religious schools in Jerusalem. I didn't know him, but everything I've heard about him is quite amazing. But he was not a rabbi from afar. He was with the soldiers in Lebanon, and when they ended up being in a situation of a battle, he was there and was also as a combat soldier, not just as a rabbi, and he was killed. And one of his wife's friends, a woman who was his wife's friend, wrote something very moving about, like, she was writing, this is the first time that I experienced someone who I knew closely who was killed, because she didn't have this experience before. And she was writing to her Haredi friends, hopefully you'll listen to this. You see, you can be seriously religious and be in the army. It's not a contradiction. So again, what I'm claiming is sometimes we challenge certain claims and statements that are made by Haredim or by certain Haredim about Zioni Dati people, and therefore we pose a threat, not because we're doing something negative, because we're actually doing something positive and misproving a myth about things that are supposedly impossible. In a similar way, sometimes maybe some parts of, those people who are conservative and keep conservative halakha in a serious way and are committed, and are people who study Torah and reach decisions based on sources and so on, even if their methods are different than mine and what they allow themselves to arrive in psak, it goes beyond what I think is okay and is right. But they show us that it's not impossible. So, I have to deal with that. So, okay, I'm not going to say, well, you're all bad people just so I don't have to deal with this. Okay, so maybe I have to deal with it. Yes, Tova. You're muted.
And there you go.
Yes,
Thank
hear
you.
you.
Okay. The thing is that we live together. The kids go to the army together. They go to school many times they go to the same schools. Now the question is, when they get married, how are they getting married? By whom? A Reform guy met a girl that is from an Orthodox family. What happens then? Do we have
Why is that a question?
Okay, because let's say the girl or whoever it is wants the Reform rabbi to perform the marriage.
Well, then I guess she's not Orthodox.
but she is Orthodox, but her parents want, but she doesn't know what to do. There's a problem. What do you do?
Okay, maybe her parents are Orthodox, maybe she's not, or maybe,
So what do you do?
okay, so if a couple, what do you do if the couple, one is religious, one is not religious? So you're saying that's not a problem, so you're gonna have a rabbi performing the chuppah. But what if one is, you know, I don't know, they'll have to find their way, but how do you, for instance, how do you maintain a couple that one is religious and one is not? You have decisions to make. You have to make decisions about mikveh, and you have to make decisions about
Right.
Shabbat and all kinds of things. And yes, I understand the difficulty in a different way, meaning there are things where the non-religious person can compromise and the religious person can't compromise.
Right.
And that creates a difficulty which is uneasy because you want each one of us to take a step towards the other so we can live together. So what I would suggest is you, the religious person, you have to make that step in different areas, and there are areas that are not halachic, because you can't accept not having mikveh, and you can't accept not having Shabbat in your personal life. You can allow your spouse, you can say, I will keep Shabbat. Let's decide what the family will look like, where the children are going to go to school, all
Right.
kinds of questions, but there have to be places. You can't live in a marriage always having things your way. You have to look for places where you can say, okay, this will be done your way in a way that doesn't, that on the one end shows the other side, the other person that you're aware and sensitive to their, it has to be this way, that they will have a say about how the house is handled, how the house runs, and how the family lives its life. But at the same time, in a way that doesn't infringe upon your own keeping halacha. I would say the same about an Orthodox and conservative or Reform couple, and I do know such couples. Each one on Shabbat, they get up in the morning, and each one goes to a different shul. So they don't daven together because they won't daven together. Neither of them will daven in the other one's shul. But so there are things they do together and things they do separately.
What
And they
happens
learn
with
how
the
to
kids?
handle it.
What happens with the kids?
Okay, so they have to make decisions. They have to make decisions, and they will make decisions, and they obviously their children are going to hear different voices, which is their decision. You might say, that's not what I want for my life. I want my home to give my children a more definite, clear, not diverse message. You might say, oh, it's beautiful, let them hear different voices. I'm not going to interfere with your life, but I can understand that it can be done. I thought you were raising a different issue, but I will raise that a little bit later on.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi?
Michael.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, let me chime in a little bit. I'm getting kind of two tracks here from the discussion. One is the micro track. What does the individual do to interact with what Tova was just talking about? And we've seen all sides of that, certainly in the United States. Everybody we know, or most of the people we know in Israel, are observant, so it hasn't really come up that much for us, but some. But those things, the individuals have to decide, and it always seems to me that it's been that way throughout history, unless you're in a situation where the outside world keeps you in the shtetl and you don't have any choices about how you live. People have always had a choice about how they live. And to me, that's one of the reasons that our numbers have always stayed as small as they have, because those are the people that identify and continue to practice Judaism, and the others assimilate out. It'd be fascinating to do a genetic test on all the peoples of the world and how many real Jews are there. But the macro, which is how does this affect Klal Yisrael? And I think that's the question you asked at first, is there something dangerous or harmful about those streams of Judaism that do not follow all of halacha? And what I would suggest is it's not so much whether or not they follow halacha, but what form of political stream do they follow? The people that Mark was talking about, that the Jews that are protesting Israel and trying to get weapons.
Eliezer mentioned.
Oh, Eliezer, sorry. I like to blame Mark for things, so it's okay. But those people are not necessarily doing that for Jewish reasons. They're doing it for progressive reasons. Much of their religion is being a progressive. Judaism is maybe an ethnicity, a label, but they believe
As
in,
my American relatives tell me, it enables them to say, as a Jew.
yes, yes, as you know, Bernie would say, right. So I think, you can make those distinctions. How do you fix that? I don't know. I don't know. My only problem with the conservative movement is, from what I've seen and experienced personally, the teaching that comes out of it, at least where we are in the States, seems very superficial to me, that they never expose all the layers of Jewish thought and complexity that you find in the Orthodox world, which is, one of the things that attracts me anyway, and Etta. But how do they escape from that if they're never exposed to the complexity? And some of that, it seems to me, is just, it has to be self-regulated. They have to be driven to seek it out themselves and decide whether it's worth the extra changes in lifestyle that go along with that.
First of all, I'd like to say I can identify with some of your criticism, what bothers you. I've seen some of that myself. Knowledge that is very light, superficial, not deep, not detailed. Sometimes in dealing with modern challenges of Judaism, because they're more willing to accept change or to accept nullifying something that existed in the past. So it's easier for them to say, well, this was an expression of something that we believed in the past, and we don't believe it in anymore. And Orthodoxy is more not so quick to accept that kind of answer, and therefore sometimes deals with it in a deeper way, because we have to deal with it, because we have to challenge it head on and find a different interpretation or find a way to justify it, whatever it is. Sometimes it causes something that is, I've seen this with some acquaintances, that it causes us to look for something which is deeper in a sense. Of course, I'm subjective and looking at this from a subjective perspective, but this is, my perspective, my attitude, my opinions, and what I believe in is, I'll give another example that I've seen in several places, but not very many. For instance, something that happened once in Canada when Rav Rabinovich, Zichrono Livracha, who ended up being a Rosh Yeshiva of a Hesder Yeshiva here in Israel, but at the time was a rabbi in Toronto, I believe it was, and someone Reform wanted to use the Orthodox mikveh, and there was a whole discussion about whether they should allow them to do that or not. And Rabbi Rabinovich wrote that it's Yetzer Hara. These kind of fights are Yetzer Hara. And what we really need is to teach Torah. We need and not only do we need to teach Torah, I would add to what he said, how do we teach Torah? In what way do we teach Torah? We have to live Torah in a way that brings light, that it makes a Kiddush Hashem, that it shows, for instance, for this woman who grew up Haredi, it proves a rabbi like Avi Goldberg, Zichrono Livracha, shows to her that what she was raised upon, that you can't go to the army and be seriously religious. She looks at him and she says, what can I say? That was wrong. So, and in a similar way, we have to call it to the other side. You can be a modern person and keep Torah seriously. You can be a modern thinking, free thinker and scientist and all kinds of things, and yet keep religious laws. and all kinds of things like that on the one hand. On the other hand, we have to make plans. How do we bring this voice to the world, to the general Jewish population, and also to be sensitive to what can they hear, what can they not hear, how you can make a gradual process. What can they accept or they can't accept? I'll tell you a class I did today, again, with girls, 9th grade girls in school, in a religious school. We're learning about Shabbat, Ilchot Shabbat. And I know that there are certain halachot, first of all, that these girls don't know, are not aware of, and some of them are going to be very difficult for them to accept. And it's interesting, some of the prohibitions of Shabbat, they very much identify with. They can sometimes say it's uncomfortable, but I really think it's important. I told them to grade them from 1 to 10. 1 is, oh, it's terrible, it's horrible, like, it's very difficult for me. I don't identify with it at all. And 10 is, it's a prohibition and it restricts me, but I love it. It's great. And like certain things like electricity and cell phones get high grades, meaning they identify with having it off on Shabbat because they experience that it's a good thing. And some things they don't, and the things they find most difficult to accept are things that have to do with what's the term in English? With beauty, cleanliness, very physical things. Prohibitions of Shabbat about things like that are very difficult for them to accept because it leaves them in a very uncomfortable position. I'm used to doing my hair this way and bathing every day, and all kinds of things that suddenly, oh, I'm stuck. How do I deal with this? So we dealt with it today. But what I did with them today is I told them, there's a song in Israel that's very popular right now. Not in, I don't know, all of Israel, in some circles, which it's a song about Hashem. It says, Hashem Yitbarach ohev oti, Hashem likes me and everything's going to be good. And it's very superficial because, Hashem loves me. It means everything will be comfortable for me. Always I get what I want and Hashem protects me from all dangers. Sorry, that's a little naive. So I came to the classroom today. I wrote on the board the beginning of the song. And then I wrote, Hashem loves me, sometimes shows me love in ways that are comfortable for me, and sometimes tell me don't do something because it's not good for you. I love you. I'm telling you, don't do it because it's not good for you. Just like Abba or Ima do, right? Parents say to children, don't do that. I don't let you do that. Not because I hate you, because I love you and I know it's not good for you. And then we got into certain halachic details on Shabbat in the class, and I challenged them, tell me how this is love. Why does Hashem tell us this? How is this love of you? And they came up with things, and it was very interesting. I'm using that as an example of how do we project Torah to general public? Do we just say, you have to keep it, it's rigid, I accept it's a yoke. But how do you convince people that a yoke is something positive that's going to help them grow and so on? So we have to think, be sensitive, be modest, to listen to what bothers them, to listen to what they, what we can project, and it will turn them off. And maybe they have a point there, all kinds of things. But I believe that the bottom line is study Torah in depth, teach Torah in depth, bring out the light of the Torah, and that is what we need to do, and not to be busy with negative struggles against all kinds of people. I don't think that's going to get us very far. You did mention, Michael, something else that I think could be significant. I'm looking at my different points here because it related one of the points I was going to make. Not about that one, no, not that one. About, or maybe it wasn't about that. Oh, yeah. You or Tova or things that you said before. What happens in all kinds of mixed marriages and things like that? Let's talk about not only Jewish mixed marriages, what happens about general mixed? It gets watered down, and sometimes it creates homes where you can be one member is Jewish and one is not. You can have couples, one is Jewish, one is not. Conversion, not conversion, which we discussed on Shabbat before Mincha, but without conversion, or acceptance in the community without conversion. So there are those who blame non-Orthodox movements with assimilation is your fault, or not assimilation and culturally, but mixed marriages, or what's the word? התבוללות, not assimilation in the cultural sense, but the
Intermarriage?
yeah, intermarriage is causing, there are less Jews. There are less Jews, there are less Jewish families. Jews marry non-Jews, children are not Jewish, and so on. So there's we're losing Jews, and we're losing Jews in tremendous numbers in North America, and in North America less than other places even more than North America.
Yeah.
And without having this as a clear red line, it's not going to stop. And if you accept non-Jews as members in the community, and you say you can come with your non-Jewish spouse to the community and we accept them as a member, so you're saying we're not drawing a line. So this is dangerous. And yes, I do identify a danger here, but I don't think it starts, and yes, I will have criticism of non-Orthodox movements, or even, I know one Orthodox rabbi who claims that we should accept it as well, because what can you do? They're married already. We can't throw out the Jewish member. But I don't think it's the movements that are, I don't think it's their fault that it's happening. It's the lack of Jewish education. It's the lack of Jewish commitment that ends up in this situation. And non-Orthodox movements don't make it worse. They make it a little less bad. Maybe I could see ways to make it to be more influential and prevent intermarriage and stop intermarriage and stop losing Jews, or lower the numbers of losing Jews. But it's not that they are making it happen. They are to some extent. I wish they would do a better job, and I wish we would do a better job. We're all not doing a good enough job. They could do a better job. I don't think it's happening because there are Reform and conservative people, therefore there is intermarriage. It's a question of how deep the Jewish education is, how committed we are, and how we project it. And also when we have, and what you were saying before, Michael, this is why I thought of it, because how deep or how superficial is the Judaism that you're giving them? And even though I will be critical, I will join you in your criticism of how sometimes the Judaism they're being given is superficial, and therefore it doesn't prevent intermarriage. At the same time, sometimes they are the only thing that some Jews can accept. And some Jews, for their only Jewish identity is that kind of less deep and less detailed Jewish identity. But my Jewish identity is not going to be relevant for them. And sometimes this is, so it's not because that identity exists that there is intermarriage. If I could convince them all to be more committed in a deeper and more detailed way, I wish I could.
May I say something?
Yes.
Yes, Jewish education has a lot to do with it, but I want to point out something bigger than that, a much bigger picture. In the mid-90s, I attended an interfaith conference in Bendorf, Germany, of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And there were 5 of us from America at this particular conference. And
what year was it?
The mid-90s. I don't remember
Okay.
exactly which year.
More or less 30 years ago.
Yeah. And in Europe, and this is what they mostly spoke about, because the majority of the participants were from Europe and not the US. They kept praising the Americans because you've got people who go to church or synagogue or whatever. You have people involved, but already involvement in church is on the decline. This was years ago, and it's not just, and it's important to keep this in mind. It's not only conservative Judaism or Reform Judaism offers fewer hours of instruction a week or things like that. That does contribute to it. However, there's a much more global societal pressure
Mhm.
That does not encourage involvement in whichever religion it happens to be. So just as there are synagogues, well-known synagogues, large building with beautiful buildings and so on, unlike Kinor, that need to rent out some of their space or share space. I sent you something, Rav Tzvi, a week or so ago of something I saw on Newberry Street in Boston. I was in a state of shock. There was a church on the street sharing space with a Reform synagogue. And they had like they advertised it, and there were a few openings and entrances to the building. And then the what was apparently the main entrance, I don't know, and it was like two doors. On one side, it said whatever the name of the church was, I don't remember. And the other side said, I think it was Central Synagogue, but I can't remember for sure, you know.
I noticed the
Not named-
pictures. Yeah.
You've got the picture anyways. Is synagogues being what they are. So it's much more complicated than that. The Europeans were so envious, literally, of the Americans who had the tradition of people going to church on Sunday and the Jews going to synagogue, et cetera,
Mm.
that already 30 years ago in Europe, that wasn't happening. That it was visibly on the decline. They were, you know, almost in tears, bemoaning the trend. Now, yes, Jewish education makes a big difference. So even within Judaism, and now you're not going to like this at all, but even within Jewish communities and Judaism, there are actors, participants, whatever you want to call them, who are actually contributing to a decline in suburbia of many synagogue memberships because they're offering, well, you could have your son bar mitzvah, they don't talk about the girls, if you just come on Sundays, and then you don't have to join an expensive synagogue. And I won't name names here, but this is going on certainly in suburban Boston, where I watched it happen with my own two eyes, where synagogues can't maintain enough of a membership to pay for a full Hebrew school and to pay the salaries of not just the.
So what are you saying? That it's not?
I'm saying that it's much more complicated.
Okay.
Yes, you're talking from the point of view of, yeah, especially in Israel, the la'ag, the you know, the intense la'ag that you hear, and when people say, oh, they're reforming, which is very depressing because it's Jews being, you know, nasty about other Jews. But I'm saying it's part of a bigger trend. And then when
but,
you
but
talk
wherever
about,
we are here or in North America or in Europe, we have to be aware of the reality and try to deal with it and do our best. Our best has to do with stronger, deeper Jewish education and more committed. But at the same time, as I was saying before, sensitive to who the people are, what's relevant for them. And what I was saying is, although I will be critical of myself and Orthodox education and conservative and Reform Jewish education, but at the same time, for some people, this more light, less deep, less committed Jewish education and way of life is what maintains for them their Jewish identity. And it's not because of that there's intermarriage, but because of that, there's a little bit less. It was more.
I agree with you. And the Jewish education thing, and you know, I ran Jewish schools for quite some time in the States. But it's not just once upon a time, kids in public schools didn't have a bazillion athletic activities and they could actually go to Hebrew school after school. And today, separate from the day schools, today there are so many sports activities that even if you wanted to send your kid to an afternoon Hebrew school, you couldn't.
Okay.
Or
It's still our challenge. These are our
the
challenges.
number
we have
of
to deal
days
with.
that the kids actually get of education besides Sunday,
Okay.
it keeps getting cut back and cut back. The conservative movement 20, 30 years ago, Hebrew school minimum Jewish education was 6 hours a week. I challenge you to find anyone that's got a 6 hour a week program going. They've cut it back to 4 hours a week, 2 hours on Sunday,
Okay.
2 hours during the week, and
Please.
you can't maintain the basic knowledge at that level. You simply cannot teach Hebrew and Tefillah and any.
Ilana, forgive me, just I want to allow
Mosh?
some other people to. It's already
Okay,
we're getting late. I want to have
this
other
is a
people
very
participate.
passionate subject for me. Yes, sorry.
Yes, Tova.
I just want to mention so that we shouldn't feel so bad. That is that during the time of the Second Temple, there were divisions just like at our times. There were the Stukim and the Plushim and the Beit Osim, and there were the Mityavnim. So we have, and there were the people from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we know that we had these divisions amongst us that existed then, and they aren't very different today. We just, we don't want to look and see what happened to them, but I'm just thinking that the divisions, we tend to divide ourselves for some reason. This is a tendency that we have. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Nothing new.
So, but I think that going back to the main message is that yes, we all need to work stronger on our Jewish education in so
Right.
many different ways.
Right.
But it's not because of someone who's less successful in Jewish education or is more or less, but it's not because of that there's intermarriage. They are at least trying to pull it back to some extent.
Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
I'll try to be brief. I'll try to be less than half an hour.
You-
Michael, I want to respond a little bit, but before I do that, first of all, let me just, return to a theme I mentioned before. Look, any human activity spans a spectrum. And no matter where you are on the spectrum, there are always people further to one side and further to the other side. So no matter where we are, we're more religious, less religious, there's always going to be somebody a little bit further that way or a little bit further that way. So there's always a continuous spectrum. And we're always going to have discussions about where we land on that spectrum and where we should shift our attention. But in addition to that, I think, Michael, you touched on something that I think is really fundamental and different. And that is that, there's a religious component that we're talking about, but there's also, I think, very importantly in the last 75 years, a political component, which is fundamental. And the political component in my mind is that, yes, Judaism is important as a cohesive, keeping us together religiously, but it's also important to keep together this country. And that is different. And it's a very different thing that is, that as Tova said, that occurred, that was 2,000 years ago, but it hasn't been present in the intervening 2,000 years. And here we are in a different era, which is a political era. And the danger that we have in factionalizing too much within the religious perspective can affect us as a body politic, as a nation to survive. And that's extremely important in my view. So the religion and the politics have to be somehow synthesized together much more, shall we say, productively than perhaps we are doing currently.
Can I make very just quickly? That at that time, yes, Rabbi. Can I say
Go ahead.
something? Oh,
Go ahead, but we're gonna have to.
I know.
We're gonna have to
Just a
make
second.
progress to ending. So if
Okay,
anyone
okay.
wants to say
At that
something,
time, it
just,
takes false.
leave room for others.
At that time, there were also political issues. there were also political issues. It had to do with the way if you wanted to be part of the Greek Empire or part of the Roman Empire or the culture. So it's very similar. And the Jews were also divided.
Well, I hope we learn the lesson from them and don't repeat what they
We
did.
should. Anyway, sorry. Anyway,
Okay,
Etta had something.
thank you.
yeah, go
You
ahead.
want to end, it's okay. Did you want to end? It's
Oh,
Say it.
Go ahead, Etta, yes.
okay. What I was going to say is years ago I taught Jewish leadership development, and it was actually there was a program Yitz Greenberg was doing from out of New York, and one of the things they talked about in Judaism, it's not so much the Orthodox and the conservative and Reform. It was that Judaism became a 13-year-old religion. You had to get through your bar mitzvah, and then you never had to show up in shul again. And then suddenly they wanted you to get married to a Jew, and it's like, why? And what I found is when I was teaching and everything is that when the kids have to show up at shul on Saturday because they're required before their bar mitzvah, the parent dropped them off and left. I was teaching at a conservative shul, but in most Orthodox shuls, you'll find parents going with their kids just because they do. There are conservative parents that went with the kids, but a majority at this particular one here did not. They just dropped their kids off. And in the Reform, they didn't even have Shabbat services. They did everything Friday night, which is a whole other story. But I think it's in continuity, I think you need to have a family that shows you it's important enough. It doesn't always work lightly. I mean, kids are kids, but it at least show that it's important enough to continue. Otherwise, why do they think it is? So if you drop them off at shul and you go about your merry business, it doesn't show them that it's important.
right. It's true.
Certainly the point of family is major.
Very
Part
important.
of Jewish education is not just for kids,
Right.
whether it's day school or Sunday school. It's not just about the kids, it's certainly about the family, and that's part of that's part of the difference between school and shul. But don't think that we don't have, I'm not comparing, we don't have the same exact issues, but we do have issues with, bat mitzvah programs where they come for their bat mitzvah and then we don't see them for a while. Now they haven't left the planet, or they haven't left religion totally. Sometimes they do, but if the parents, it's not important for them, or if the parents, it was important for them, and it's not the same as the non-Orthodox movements in the United States and things like that, but there is a point of similarity that sometimes it's very important for them. The girl goes through a whole program and it's modern, and they study, and they have a ceremony, a bat mitzvah ceremony in Kinol David and so on. And sometimes then we wonder where they've gone afterwards. And it's something that we try to deal with, So besides the children and parents group that studies together every Shabbat now, that has been very, very successful in the last year, it hasn't grown in tremendous numbers, but it's very continuous. It's very
It's encouraging, I think, very encouraging.
It's encouraging, and it's persistent. Is that the word that I'm looking for?
Continuous, yes, very nice. It
Not
stays
intense. It's not intense, but it's every Shabbat.
very nice.
What's the word? It's consistent, right? It's very consistent.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it has not big numbers, but it's nice and it's pleasant and it's good. And we're looking to do
A
more
good
and to,
idea. It's a
and to
good idea.
continue for the teenagers. And that's part of the same issue. These are our responsibilities. And of course, we can't take the place of the parents. I always like to quote, you can have, I said this to the bar mitzvah boy a week and a half ago, you can have Moshe Rabbeinu, but Judaism comes from Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imeinu. The rabbi can teach, but Judaism comes from the parents. And if the parents don't pass it on, that's why we call them Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imeinu. And then you have Moshe Rabbeinu, he's the great leader. But the great leader can't raise the children of every family, and that has to be done.
Sure.
He tries to influence the parents to raise their children, but of course the family is major in all of this. Absolutely. Last but not least, guys, we're going way overboard, so keep it short and say something short.
So
Bevakasha.
the good news is that I really agreed with what Mark said tonight, so we're on the same page.
No.
I know.
I'm very
Shock.
upset about that, Michael.
Yes.
It's okay. I have bad news too. The bad news, I think, is that we seem to be living in a time of enormous change, where suddenly we're seeing pressures from the outside world against the Jews. It's, we thought it was history, but no, it's today. And Western civilization is declining I agree with what Ilana was saying. And it's, as we see a decline in religious observance in Europe, you see a massive decline in birth rate. We're seeing the same thing in the United States. Birth rate in the United States is below replacement levels. It's like 1.6. That's certainly not true for Israel. So we're doing something right. But I think we should all agree that it's probably more important that people find some part of Judaism to identify with and be part of the whole, rather than chastise people for not doing enough or not behaving the way we think they should. And if we can, draw them in, we should. But I think we're really going to have to hold on to each other.
Thank you, Eliezer.
Just a very short statement is I think that Michael brought in a very important issue, which is way too late to discuss right now, which is politics versus religion. And,
Sorry.
I think it's a big mistake on any side when politics becomes one's religion. And I mean, I see this in many situations, and maybe we should talk about it sometime. I mean, it's
Okay, I made a note of that. Thank you. Ilana, you get the last word.
On a very short positive note, when education does make a difference. So I was in the States for, among other things, the anniversary of my granddaughter's bat mitzvah and birthday, and she laned Breshit, the first aliyah of Breshit, at her bat mitzvah. And this year, both Simchat Torah, which there is the second day, after Shmini Atzeret, and then she did it again on Shabbat Boker. She did
Very
the
nice.
second again, and it's a very long aliyah, and I'm very proud of her because it does make a difference.
Very nice.
Okay,
Very nice.
okay, so
I also learned the fourth.
let's have
Thank you.
more positive occasions. Okay.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.
יישר כוח.
Bye.
Kol hakavod, everybody.
Toda
לילה
rabah.
טוב.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.